greatest form of control is where you think you're free when you're being fundamentally manipulated and dictated to. One form of dictatorship is being in a prison cell and you can see the bars and touch it. The other one is sitting in a prison cell but you can't see the bar, you think you're free. What the human race is suffering from is mass hypnosis. We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Red Pill Hardcore TV show. Now, I always start off the show by saying this is a very special episode, but this really is a very special episode. I actually have my co-host here with me from Targeted, our other TV show. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it. But yes, Kristen D. Manners is here, or Chrissy D, as she likes to be called. I think when we start the radio show up again and she joins us, that's what we're going to call her, Chrissy D. But this episode is for the medical community, okay? We have our special guest. And you know what? It's not even going to be right for me to introduce a special guest because I already have Chrissy D here with us. So I'm going to let her introduce our special guest.
Okay, hello everybody, Kristen Dean Manners from Targeted, and thank you, V. I appreciate very much you having me on, and we do indeed have a very special guest today. With us today is Doug Heckencamp, and Doug, what a fine Doug is. Doug is in the cannabis industry, and he is such a special guest today. I'm going to let Doug introduce himself, but Doug is a producer of cannabis and in particularly CBD oil, which is the catch of all catch in the cannabis industry because it is the pain reliever of all pain relievers when we're talking about cannabis. And I'm going to let Doug introduce himself and tell a little bit about what he's has going on. And I indeed want to thank him for joining us. It was short notice. Doug, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have going on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. So my background, I was a physical therapist for 13 years. I got my master's at Marquette University in Wisconsin. I was a competitive gymnast for many years and had a lot of injuries, which I was then taking large doses of Motrin, which were essentially destroying my liver and my stomach. And so when I got to Marquette University and I was in the physical therapy program, one of my classes was pharmacology, and our professor was talking about how, the history of pharmacology and how cannabis was used for over 5,000 years for different medicinal purposes, and how, it was legal in the United States. And even Eli Graham and Eli Lilly, excuse me, and Graham and some of these other pharmaceutical companies after World War I had all these farms that produced hemp and cannabis oils. That was all used in different elixirs that were used for over 50% of the different curatives for diseases and pain and ailments and whatnot. I learned that in 1942, cannabis was removed from the pharmacopoeia And it was against the advice of the American Medical Association. I think it was Henry Woodward was the spokesperson for the American Medical Association and pleaded with Congress saying, if you're going to make this illegal for medical, make it illegal, please don't make it illegal for medical purposes because we use it so much. And my professor went on to talk about one of the greatest things that cannabis was used for was pain and inflammation. And up until that time, I heard the word marijuana, and I was very properly propagandized by our government, thinking that, God, marijuana, it's this horrible thing, and you try it once, you're going to hallucinate, and your hot dogs are going to talk to you, and you know, all these crazy things that we saw from the Reefer Madness.
Yes, I remember that movie. Yes.
Yeah.
That's actually before my generation, but I took a look back and looked at it just because people were talking about it.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. Like, it's so, I was so like propagandized that, you know, when I was offered marijuana through high school and college, I was very like, you know, against it, stay away from it. And but then when I heard my professor talk about it and he said, hey, this is really good for inflammation and pain, I was like, what? Wait a minute. And it doesn't have side effects, and it's not going to eat the lining of my stomach, and it's not going to elevate my liver enzymes. Oh, and by the way, it does all these other amazing things too. So that is what piqued my interest. And really ever since that moment, it was like I was on this quest. So I was starting the physical therapy program, but I was also like in search for this plant that would help me personally with my own injuries. I stopped doing gymnastics because I couldn't walk in the morning and I couldn't sleep at night. And so this really hit me hard. And so, you know, during the summer breaks, I'd hike around areas of Wisconsin looking for ditchweed. I had no idea what I was looking for. And just to have this plant. So when I had my physical therapy clinic, I had patients that were suffering, you know, from post-surgical issues. And some of them, there's one lady in particular, she had a knee replacement, and I had worked on hundreds of knee replacements, and I know what people can tolerate. And I started working on her, and she could not tolerate what I was doing. And I looked at her and I said, you're not taking your meds, are you? And she said, no, I'm allergic to anti-inflammatories and I'm allergic to narcotics. So I had been using cannabis myself prior to this for my own pain. And I looked at her and I said, you know, you need to do something. And my clinic was in a very conservative area in Colorado. And when I mentioned to her, I said, you know, you should probably try some cannabis. And she said, is this marijuana? I said, yeah, it's the same plant. And she goes, oh, I could never smoke anything. I said, well, you don't have to smoke it. You can take it edibly. And she's like, I don't know, you know, it's marijuana and blah, blah, blah. So the next time she comes in for therapy, she says, Doug, you need to tell me more about this marijuana stuff. And so at that time,
first off, do you know what sparked that comment? I gotta ask.
Because she was in so much pain, and you know, she wasn't sleeping at night. She just had a knee replacement. Her knee looks like basketball. Excuse me. She can't bend it. She can't put weight on it. She's miserable. And she can't take non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, no pain pills. So, you know, imagine having a knee replacement. They cut the bone off and they pound rods down your bone and cement it together and then sew you up. And, you know, without narcotics or pain medication, that's a pretty painful process. So, you know, I said, you know, if you're not interested in cannabis, then, you know, try some turmeric or valerian root or, you know, ashwagandha, or, you know, there's a lot of different medicinal herbs out there that are good you know, good anti-inflammatories. So the next day, you know, when she came in, she says, you got to tell me more about this marijuana stuff. So, you know, in this low tone so that nobody else could hear her, because we're in this very conservative area of the town. So at that time, I hadn't been making oils. I had keef capsules. So, you know, just the trichomes. And at that time, it was not CBD. It was a combination of white widow, northern lights, juicy fruit. You know, I had 11 different strains that I got from Amsterdam and Toronto. And I was growing those and crossbreeding and kind of trying to create something new. And, you know, I just gave it to my patients, like, tell me, does this work? You know, I mean, it's supposed to work. It works for me. Tell me how it's working for you. So I gave her some capsules with keef in it. And I said, you know, take this one at night. And I taught her how to use it. And then I said, take this other one, which is a sativa, take this in the morning and sprinkle about 1/8 of a teaspoon on your French toast in the morning before you cook it, and then cook it, and then come to physical therapy. And so she came in the next morning and she said, well, first she was in a very good mood. She said,
Yeah.
She said,
Yes, she was.
I haven't slept so well in years. That was her first comment. And she said, my knee feels really good. She says it still hurts, but it's taken the edge off. I can move it, and I can deal with it. And she said, and I'm ready to get on the bike, which when I mentioned that to her, you know, in the previous time that I had seen her in the clinic, you know, like, hey, we need to get you on the bike. We need to get your knee moving, see if you can get this, you know, get this thing moving around. And she's like, oh, no way. And I mean, I could tell by working on her that there was no way that I was going to get her on the bike. And then she brought it up to me the next time. She's like, I'm ready to get on the bike. So she actually did. She got on the bike, and we were able to progress her through therapy, do hands-on work, and do the things that we needed to do to get her knee back into a functional state. And we did it all with cannabis. And we were just as successful with that as we were with narcotics. And knowing that what I know today, this was back in 2004. So knowing what I know today about oils, I could have treated her even better. And so I went back to, this last September, I went back to Marquette University and did a talk about cannabis. And
was that well received?
It was very well received. I spoke to the professors in the physical therapy program, the grad students, and some of the 5th and 6th year students. And the title of my presentation was Cannabis Oil, A New Era. Because something has to replace this opioid crisis, and it's working. And so back in Wisconsin, they don't understand cannabis like we do in Colorado. Here, it's mainstream. Most people are familiar with it. It's not taboo anymore. Back in Wisconsin, you mention marijuana or hemp or cannabis, and they're all confused. To them, it's just this taboo, and they don't want to talk about it. And so I went through the history of cannabis. how it was illegalized, why it was illegalized, some of the major players, William Hearst, Harry Anslinger. And then I talked about Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, who's he's the grandfather of cannabis, and he was the one that founded THC and CBD and the active components of cannabis in the 1960s. I went and listened to him speak in Rhode Island in 2010. He was the keynote speaker. There was 28 of the head researchers from around the globe that came together and presented their latest research. And Raphael was the keynote speaker, and I was able to meet him, and I learned a ton about him, and I kind of discussed some of his findings and things. And then I talk about, you know, what is cannabis oil? Where do we get it from? And I talk about the plant and the differences between marijuana and hemp, THC and CBD. And then I talk about the physiology of how does this work in our body? Like, okay, CBD is a great anti-inflammatory. How? Why? How does it work? So I put it on a level that not only physical therapy students would be able to understand, or professors would be able to understand, but also the average individual. Like, you know, we have these receptors, and they're located throughout our immune system. They parallel our immune system. They're in all of our white blood cells. They're in the lining of the arteries and the veins that transmit white blood cells out into the interstitial space when we have...
Well, I've actually done a little research on this. There are, yes, well, and when you talk about receptors, there are cells in the body that are shaped a certain way to take certain molecules, and that's the only thing it will take. So there are cannabis and THC receptors built into our biology.
Correct.
It is a medicine for us. We're supposed to be taking it.
Yeah. So that's called the endocannabinoid system. So that's our own bodies. You know, we have receptors. So here's the other, this is the other thing I explained, was that we have a naturally occurring chemical in our body called anandamide. And we have another one called 2-AG, which is 2-arachidiol glycerol. So anandamide binds to CB1 receptors, which is what THC binds to. THC and anandamide are the only two things that bind to that receptor. So therefore, it does not affect or interact with an opioid. But what was interesting is that years ago we thought that we thought that endorphins and enkephalins were responsible for that runner's high that people would get after going for a 5-mile run or so. But they found that those molecules were too large to cross the blood-brain barrier, and so it had to be something else. And they found that it was anandamide that actually binds to CB1 receptors, and that causes the runner's high, which low doses of THC, essentially the high that people feel is that runner's high that our government finds that is so, you know, a horrible thing. No,
really quick, are you saying that, are you saying that the THC actually can reproduce that?
Yes. So what happens is with anandamide, gets released in the nervous system to block calcium from coming into the neuron, the synapse, into the neuron. The neuron releases a neurotransmitter that transmits a signal, either pain or, you know, motion, you know, physical motion. And when anandamide binds to CB1 receptor, it blocks that calcium input. When the calcium input is blocked, that neurotransmitter stops sending, or that neuron stops sending that neurotransmitter to the next neuron. And so that's why it decreases pain. That's why it decreases seizures. So it's called a neuromodulator. Now, anandamide, the body's naturally occurring substance, becomes metabolized by this other chemical called let me just make sure I have the right word. It's FAAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase. That is what metabolizes anandamide, and it metabolizes it rather quickly, so it no longer stays in the CB1 receptor. When THC binds to that receptor, FAAH, or fatty acid amide hydrolase, takes a much longer time to metabolize THC. Therefore, THC, or that runner's high, that it modulates that neural pathway to stop sending those neurotransmitters. It modulates that for a much longer period than our own body's system. So
so it basically, in short, this is something that the body needs. I mean, the runner's high, you know, the exercise, the activity. I mean, there's the applications and that process in itself is something that is needed, especially in rehabilitation, I think you're saying. But I want to take a step back here and clarify for people. Calcium dumping in the body is not necessarily a good thing. It usually contributes to a lot of physical illnesses and harm. Calcium going to the wrong place in the body, doing the wrong things, it's very bad. I suffer from calcium efflux disease myself, horrible neck pains, and sort of stuff like that. I'm not in a country right now where I can enjoy the wonderful products of the cannabis, but hey, I'm gonna fight for it, right?
Right.
And on that subject, and you brought up having, you know, steel rods being, you know, put in you, and bones. All this stuff sounds very painful. I can't relate with it because I haven't had it done yet, but Kristen D. Manners has. I believe she has a double rod.
So I do. I have a double back rod.
And I don't know if you have partaken in the medical aspect of the stuff, but you have brought this very knowledgeable man on the show about this, and I assume that you would like to help in this because you're going to be doing a cooking show that our network is going to be producing. So, I mean, how do you feel about all of this?
No, I've actually spoken to Doug about this very issue. We had a conversation on the telephone about you know, the issue that I'm facing, and he spoke to me in depth about what he thought could help my problem, and we've discussed how to treat it, what he thought would be an effective way to end some of this excessive pain that I'm experiencing, and we're going to try to get that addressed. So I'm extremely excited to try to you know, end some of this excruciating, debilitating pain that I suffer through on a daily basis. Mainly, well, first of all, because my quality of life has suffered so extraordinarily. But number two, because the demands of what I have coming along here are going to be, you know, as we talked to Roger about, once a week cooking show on top of my other responsibilities as far as the shows I have committed to. And that's going to entail being on my feet, possible travel, et cetera, and I can't afford to be in the condition that I'm in right now. Like I've been sitting here, how long have we been taping now? I've been sitting here for I don't know how long, and if it wasn't for the fact that I've learned how to control my emotion when it comes to the pain that I'm in, I am in excruciating pain right now. Just holding myself up, holding my back up, and sitting here, the pain in my legs and the pain in my back is excruciating. And I already told Doug that I want to end the fact that I have to rely on pain medication in order to even function, even a somewhat normal existence. It irritates me to no end that I have to rely on those. I've never abused my medication, not ever. I don't feel the need to. It doesn't do anything to me except for take the edge off. I don't get any euphoria from the medication, so I don't feel the need to overuse what I'm given. Not to mention, I think it's a ridiculous thing to do that. The only reason I want off of it is because it does have side effects, and also the stigma attached to opiate use now is just horrendous. No matter what. No matter if you're responsible with it or not, the minute you have to go into the emergency room for any kind of care, you are automatically labeled an addict. Even if you take your medication as prescribed, you are automatically labeled an addict. I don't care how responsible you are with it. They label me an addict, period. And I can't stand that because I'm not an addict. Never have abused, never will abuse, but it doesn't matter. From the time you walk in until the time you walk out, they're shoving literature in your face about opioid addiction. And it's like, you know, that is highly offensive. I am a responsible human being and I've never abused my medication, but I don't want to be dependent on the stuff. I want to be free of having to take medication every 8 hours just to function, just to walk somewhat normal. I can't stand straight up right now. I'm bent over somewhat. I cannot stand straight up without, I can't. I just can't.
Without having a lot of pain. Right?
I can't flat do it. My pain management doctor has seen it over and over and over again, and that's why they wanted me to potentially have the neurostimulator implanted in my back to try to give me some relief and enable me to stand straight up again. But as of this moment, I cannot do it. There's
that option of, okay, these people are dumping opioids and other harmful things. Now they want to turn some cyborgs, and we've strayed away from Mother Nature. I mean, Doug, I don't know what you feel about that. I have an idea, but as far as Mother Nature's concerned, Mother Nature's not giving us something that's destroying our liver that we need to not feel pain. I mean, I would rather have a cannabis product than the opioids.
Oh yeah,
it's a natural growing product, you know, and essentially once you grow it and harvest it and you extract the oils from it, you know, you can use it in a completely unadulterated form, and it's going to help your pain. It's going to help your inflammation without, the side effects. And, the side effects that, if you're to consider any side effects, euphoria would be one of the side effects. Well, when people are in pain and they're, you're miserable when you're in pain. So a little euphoria is actually not only good for your own mental state, but it's probably good for the mental state of the people that live with you.
Absolutely.
So, unfortunately, anything that brings us pleasure, our government feels is a bad thing. But if a pharmaceutical company produces something and it causes euphoria, or it causes a high potential for death, it's okay, because they're the ones that write the law.
There are fields and fields in other countries of marijuana that people are dying over in wars. The opioids, yes, but not marijuana. So, who's that for? The laws and this corporation stuff. It's not for us, the people. This is just for the subjugation of other people and taking their resources and the profiting off of their resources.
Yeah.
It's not, so I think, I'm sorry. This is the Red Pill Hardcore. I've got to get conspiratorial. I know everything you're saying is 100% real, Doug, but it's just, we got to add in that extra level of realism to it. And here's to let people know the movement is real. This is what we need. We need to curve the death. You are a physical therapist. You've seen the physical. You've seen the medical. You're right in between right there. You're able to get a broader view of this. And so, listening to you about this is very important. Yes, go ahead.
So to back up a little bit, I started doing this for my patients in 2004, 2005. And I told you I was in a very conservative county. In 2009, March 5th exactly, I was having dinner with my kids and my doorbell rang, and there was 2 plainclothes police officers there with a warrant wanting to see my grow. And they knew that I had the physical therapy clinic. They knew that I was providing cannabis to my patients. And they're like, we had a complaint, and therefore we need to follow up on these complaints. And, what you're doing is not illegal, but we just have to come in and see your grow. So I looked at their warrant, and I'm like, it's legit. There's nothing I can do to, stop them. So I let them in. And when I let these 2 plainclothes officers in, I had about 30, 35 people that came in every door and window that I had with automatic machine guns, bulletproof vests, ski masks, drug dogs, and I'm in the middle of upper middle class Castle Rock, Colorado. And all my neighbors are poking their heads out of their windows or out of their doors going, what is going on over at Doug's house? And so they didn't arrest me. They took my plants. They confiscated my computers. And upstairs in my office, I had a hunting rifle in a locked safe, and they confiscated that. And 8 months later, they came back and charged me with possession of a deadly weapon in the presence of drugs. And if you take it to trial and lose, your minimum sentencing would be an 8 to 48 years mandatory sentence.
Oh my gosh.
So
we'll give you a plea of 6 years in prison because you have no prior offenses. And
wow.
So
you're not a criminal.
Yeah. So after a year and a half of pretrial, I took a plea for 2 years in county jail. And in that time frame, I lost everything. I lost my PT clinic. I lost the dispensary. I lost my house. I lost my second wife. have a felony, so you can't get a job. Nobody will rent to you an apartment in this county with a felony. And so I've been starting over since 2012 and struggling to get back on my feet. Student loans have gone through the roof. You know, I was fortunate back in December. A friend of mine who was a patient of mine back in 2003, he knows about my situation, and he's a very wealthy man, and he said, Doug, I want to fund you to grow 20 acres of hemp this year. And it's a huge task. I'm very overwhelmed. I'm working on heat for my greenhouse today. And I've got about 2,000 to 3,000 plants growing in my barn right now, all hemp. I do have a license from the Department of Agriculture, so I'm covered. So, and then, you know, with the farm bill that passed this year, there was an exclusion in there, and I think this is just wrong. They said anybody who has a felony for a drug-related offense is not allowed to grow hemp. But if you are currently farming hemp and you currently have a license by the Department of Agriculture to farm hemp, you're grandfathered in. So I was lucky that this last summer, Colorado changed their law from hemp being a drug substance and CBD to now being a food substance. And when that happened, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this again. Very gun shy. I've gone through hell, and like the idea of growing cannabis again, be it hemp or marijuana, a cop shows up, they don't know the difference. You can't tell the difference looking at these plants. I grew some hemp last year in my greenhouse, and I'm like looking at this stuff and I'm smelling it, and I'm like, my God, this stuff is amazing. It's just as good as, you know, the White Widow I used to grow, or Maui Wowie. I mean, and I'm like, I had to take it to the lab to get it tested to make sure that I was below my 3% THC, and I was like waiting for days for my test to come back. I'm like, I'm praying to God that this actually comes back with little THC in it, and it did. You know, I had less than 3% THC, and I was like, this is amazing because it's the same plant. It grows the same, it smells the same, it tastes the same, but it doesn't get you high. And so, but it does take your pain down. And so it was very anxiety producing to grow again. And, you know, being funded and you know, the concept of doing 20 acres this year is a bit anxiety producing, but I feel comfortable enough that I'm doing everything right as far as Department of Agriculture goes, doing my testing, sending in my reports, and
well, you know, that's a good point that you mentioned all that. You have a legal advisor? I think we're gonna have to hook you up with one.
You know, I don't.
Well,
I should.
Well, you mentioned something else because you had already, you know, I want to make sure I understand this. Because you had already, you were already producing the hemp. Do I got this? Am I understanding this correct? You're good to go now, as far as growing, as far as getting licensed to grow, and producing what you want to now? You don't have to go through any extra hoops? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I'm completely off paper as far as like all my fines have been paid for, all of my probation's been taken care of. I'm off paper now 5+ years. So I filed the application through the Colorado Department of Agriculture. I got my my license from them, and so you know, there's no plant count. As long as your plants are less than 0.3% THC, you're fine.
Okay.
So you know, no one who has a hemp license is allowed to grow, marijuana, a plant that has higher than 0.3% THC. You cannot have the two on the same premises. And so,
So you're saying it's either or?
Yeah, and for people to grow their own marijuana with, that has, I'll use the word marijuana even though it's a slang term. For a person to grow a high THC plant, you can't have an industrial hemp license, and there's very specific rules as far, plant counts. Each county has their own rules. If you're in Douglas County, where I'm at, forget it. Don't even bother, because their restrictions on what you can and cannot do is such that it's not worth your time or your effort. Just drive down to Denver, go to a dispensary, spend $50, and get what you need.
Yeah.
And I don't, I
think it's just cutting down on the entrepreneurship. There's always a monopoly. Everything starts off with a monopoly. When other people are trying to do their own and people can't control the money, people are all about the money. They've got to control the money. They can't control the money. They're going to give people problems.
Yeah.
But see, that's why I think that, Doug, that's why I think you are in such a fabulous position from where I'm sitting, because you are a grower in Douglas County where we do not have dispensaries where they don't allow them, but you're an exclusive grower. So you have kind of a monopoly on the opportunity for investors to take a hold of your product, at least in an area where they won't allow dispensaries. Does that make sense?
Yes, but let's not confuse the two. So dispensaries are for a THC product.
That's what I'm saying.
What I'm growing is CBD, and
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the caveat is that dispensaries are not allowed to sell CBD products, which is totally crazy.
Well, explain that to me. It's CBD.
Yes.
Well,
so
I'm not a marijuana user, so please, CBD. I guess we should have started there. Is that the oil that comes from the plant?
Doug is doing something that you cannot get in a dispensary. He's producing a product that you cannot go buy in a dispensary. I can't go purchase CBD oil in a dispensary. I can't do it.
Right.
He's producing.
It's nothing with THC in it.
There's less than 3.3% THC, so you're not going to get high. And so the difference is this: so these plants look the same, and the way we get our oils. So when you look at the cannabis plant, by the time harvest time comes around, they've produced these flowers that aren't they're not petals like a rose. It's just a cluster of very tight, tiny leaves that have what's called a trichome, which is a resin gland. And these resin glands are in a very high concentration on the flower. So when we extract all those resin glands off and separate it from the plant material, we end up with oil. And what makes the difference between THC marijuana versus CBD industrial hemp is that the chemical constituents of that oil, of that resin gland on that plant, is on the marijuana plant, it just has a high percentage of THC. On the industrial hemp plant, it has a high percentage of CBD. It's just the genetics of that plant, of that particular strain. And so you can take one plant that's got 30% THC and no CBD, and you can crossbreed it with a plant that has 15% CBD, and you're going to come out with something that is a combination of both of those parent plants. And that's how, you know, in the 1960s, when Raphael Mechoulam found that THC was the active component in cannabis that made people high, now all these people started growing cannabis. Back then, you know, 8-10% THC was you know, maybe the average.
So let me ask you something. So you're talking percentage here, and you're talking 8-10% THC or 15%. What is it that's getting people high right now? Why is it the craze in California or wherever we were talking about purple haze or white widow? What's the percentage of that versus what's medically accepted or what's not?
Right. So
And along with that question, what is the difference between that, the THC, the CBD oil, and the high factor?
okay. So let's go back to the first question. So every strain is different as far as its percentage, and it's just the genetics of that plant and how they're bred. So you crossbreed, you know, a high THC. So back in the, you know, 60s, 70s, you know, they're breeding these different plants that have high percentages of THC, and essentially they ended up with higher and higher THC percentage. So these nowadays we've got plants that are, you know, testing out at 30-35% THC, and you know, essentially no CBD. They've bred all the CBD out of it. So, you know, since Dr. Raphael Mechoulam has come out and said, hey, CBD is really what's the medicinal aspect of the cannabis plant, then there was a group of people, including myself, that researched higher CBD plants. And, you know, right now, what I'm seeing is if you've got a plant within the 10 to 20% CBD range, that's a fairly high percentage plant. I have not personally seen anything over 18%. Christian, can you repeat your question?
Well, I think people would want to know what is the difference between having a product that has a high THC count and a product that has a CBD. Are you getting the same effects as far as getting the high factor or no?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good question. So, you know, despite the laws and the percentage allowable for marijuana and industrial hemp, despite the laws, if we just look at the plant, typically for pain and inflammation, what research has shown to this date that I am aware of, a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD is the most effective. For, you know, for THC modulates So let me back up. The THC receptors, which are CB1 receptors, are located primarily in the brain. What they've discovered is there are more CB1 receptors in the brain than any other receptor. It is the most prominent receptor. And this is something that they didn't teach in med school. That's how strong this prohibition has been, that they, something that is as medical as being the #1 receptor in the brain, they don't even teach in med school. Talk to any neurologist and they'll tell you never heard of it until just recently, if they've heard of it at all. So THC is what's called a neuromodulator. So it modulates the amount of nerve impulse that the brain sends out. So people with seizures, people with excessive pain, it modulates the amount of neurologic activity that the brain is firing. So sometimes with pain, let's say a person has, perfect example, person has a osteoporotic knee, so they have a lot of arthritis forming in their knee over time. They're 40, they're 50, they're 60. They notice, God, every time I go up the stairs, my knee pain's getting worse. And so, then they go to the doctor and they're like, yeah, you got a lot of arthritis, you're going to need knee replacements. They eventually get Teflon on metal or metal on metal, whatever the new artificial joint that goes into their knee is composed of. There's no pain receptor in that joint. But when that person goes up the stairs, they'll say, I feel the pain before I even start going up the stairs, but then I go up the stairs and I don't have pain. But I should be feeling pain, and some people will feel pain. And it's because the brain has developed a connection that going upstairs or doing a particular motion creates pain, and it will send that pain signal before the activity even begins, because it's so ingrained in the brain.
It's neurologically ingrained. Or like a phantom limb, like when you lose a limb.
I really wondered about that.
Exactly right. And so what THC does is that it modulates that. It says, hey, there's no pain here. You stop sending these impulses that there's pain.
Yeah.
So the same thing with, seizures. It's like an electrical storm in the brain. And so that's why, kids that are getting CBD, which still has some THC in it, it's a full spectrum oil, and that's a whole nother subject. But it's not only the CBD, but it's also the minimal amounts of THC that are in there that modulate the amount of neural activity that's going on in the brain that stops their seizures. So, it's the same thing with PTSD and things like that. So a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC, as far as the current research goes that I'm aware of, that's kind of what people are finding the most relief from for pain and inflammation. So,
okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, Doug, it does. I think people are just curious to see what the differences are between the two. If you're used to using one and you're going to be transitioning to the next, I think people are just, have a lot of questions about the differences, and you're very knowledgeable about the two, and it's a very good information to have, and I thank you for your explanations. You're very educated on the subject.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And this is about all the time we have for this episode. So, Doug, I just want to mention to the listeners that, yes, go ahead.
CBD that has less than 3% THC, which is considered, industrial hemp or legal CBD oil, which you can get, on Amazon. There's a bazillion companies out there. You can get it at Walmart. You can get it, it's hitting the shelves. Some states are still up in arms about it, especially some of the states in the Bible Belt. They're just uneducated about it, but it does not cause euphoria. It does not, so CBD binds to the CB2 receptor, which is not found in the brain primarily. It's primarily found in the immune system. It is a huge immune system booster. It parallels the immune system. And so there is a long list of different things that CBD is helpful for, not just pain and inflammation, but like lowering blood sugar levels, lowering blood pressure, helping with, it's the only thing that they have found that actually is effective against MRSA. It is one of the highest things that are effective against MRSA. It inhibits cancer cell growth. It promotes bone growth. So in your bone, you have what's called an osteoblast, which is a cell that makes new bone, and you have osteoclasts, which absorb bone. So getting back to the calcium, if you don't take enough calcium into your diet, your body will automatically rob your bone for the calcium needed to create muscle contractions, to cause the nervous system to be able to function properly, for your heart muscle to recover from a contraction. All your muscle contractions need calcium to cause it to relax. So if you don't get it in your diet, your body robs it from the bone. So CB2 receptors are located in both osteoblasts and osteoclasts. And what it does is it increases the osteoblast cellular activity, so it makes those cells create new bone at a faster rate, and it decreases osteoclast activity, which is the cells that eat the bone and absorb the bone. So it increases your bone density, promotes bone growth. So people that have a fracture and they're healing from a fracture, CBD is going to help with enhancing the activity of that bone formation. CBD reduces the inflammation roughly 20 times the amount of a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory gram for gram. So if you look at Motrin or ibuprofen, CBD is 20 times more potent gram for gram than a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, without the issue of GI bleeding. It relieves pain. It's a neuroprotective. It's an antioxidant. Reduces the seizures and convulsions, lower blood sugar levels, relieves anxiety, suppresses muscle spasms. It's an immune modulator, like we talked about in the brain. It modulates the immune system.
Okay, so those all great information, and we're going to try to get Doug more online and more sources and ways that you can reach him. So that is it for this episode of the Red Pill Hardcore TV show. Thank you, Kristen, for being here, and I'll see you next time.